All right, so yeah, I've just started recording. So, so here I've just opened the BCA, and I'm sure you'd all know where you should be starting, but I'll just point out it's Volume 1, not Volume 2. Yeah, so that's the first thing you need to be aware of with the BCA or NCC. You can call it either, but it's probably a good habit to get into calling it the NCC rather than the BCA, even though technically both are okay, because you'll see at the bottom of every page it still does say Building Code of Australia, but it also says NCC, and technically NCC is volumes 1, 2 and 3. The Building Code of Australia is only volumes 1 and 2. But also you get some building inspector and project manager type people who these days don't even know what you mean, or will say that you're wrong if you say BCA. It's just one of those things. So go with NCC if you've got a choice, but if you've got old documents that still say BCA, it's referring to the same thing. So then you need to make sure that you know it's Volume 1, of course, because Volume 1 is for classes 2 to 9. Volume 2 is classes 1 and 10. So both of the volumes have the class information, but you would know. I mean, so class 1 is detached residential.
I'm pretty sure it actually says residential on
or row houses. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And that's usually what I check, and I go, oh, wrong one.
Yeah. So, but it's easy. I mean, you know, once you know those two classes, 1 and 10, which is essentially residential and car parks or garages that are associated with residential, you know that if you're doing that sort of work, you look at Volume 2, otherwise everything else is Volume 1. And so then, normally where you start is by then confirming the classification, and it's got this section in Volumes 1 and 2. So here it's Part A3, where you've got your classes, which I'm sure you all know off by heart now anyway. But I still sometimes look it up. If I've got to do a Class 7, I wouldn't do a Class... Oh, sorry, Class 7's car park. I do that all the time, actually. But Class 8 is one that I don't do very often. I've done one. That's laboratories and buildings like that. And then Class 9s, you've got a few different variations. And yours can be classed as Class 9B, believe it or not. Assembly buildings. Sometimes bars are classed as that, especially if they're for public entertainment. So that's one to look out for.
Elise, does that answer your question?
Yeah, so you could be classed, if it's classed as an assembly building, and sometimes you can have multiple classifications. But it's probably better for this, just for the exercise, to keep it simple and make it Class 6, which is most retail. Yeah. Yeah, so that'd be multiple classifications, but probably if is it the retail part you're looking at? Is it a public building? What's it being used for? Yeah, so probably you will have 9B. So, yeah. And that's important because it makes a big difference to the number of exits. Yeah, so, and you can tell most pubs, if they have entertainment, yeah, but you might need to add, or so that's easy because if it's carriage works or tram sheds, one of those sorts of buildings, it's easy to have lots of exits on street level in those big openings that they've got, and you just make sure that they're not all windows; that some of them are still exits. Yeah, and that's why they have all the exits in buildings like that because they have them. So here, so you can see again though, probably most of it still will be Class 6. And then, and you can have multiple classification as well. But we'll keep it simple now and keep it as Class 6, so that answers the first question there. Building classification, so I'm just going to put a note here for Town Hall. So I'll say this is building summary for Town Hall Hotel, and we're going to ignore the entertainment aspect, which would make it 9B. Oh, you're doing Barangaroo, sorry. Okay, so let's do that. That's fine. Okay, Barangaroo. So that's easier.
We don't have to do this stuff, though. Oh, we don't?
Yep. Okay, so we'll do Barangaroo. Okay, so that's even easier because... yeah, because then there's only one class.
Yeah. I thought he was doing this.
Yep, that's even easier. And it's still Class 6. So, much simpler. And...
So it still could be 9B.
Well, so what I'm saying, class 5, office building. It's not, you're not doing retail in Barangaroo, are you? Yeah, so class 5. Okay, so there we are.
No, but we're not doing Barangaroo. We are
We're doing Barangaroo. Yes, yes.
So
So I've been doing, yeah, so we've been doing the shopping part of that building on the lower levels as well, where of course it will be class 6. But yeah, so you're doing the office part, which is class 5. And then, okay, so then type of construction is the next thing. And I'll give you a handout that, believe it or not, Kylie did. You've had Kylie, haven't you? Mm-hmm. She did a really good, 'cause I know she gets a hard time sometimes about the level of detail she does, but she did a really good rundown on the workflow you can follow through, or some steps you can follow through to check all of these things. So I'll give that to you later. It's a really good PowerPoint that she did. And then, so you'll see this process that I'm going to follow is what she's outlined there. So looking at the types. So do you know what this is? The type of construction? Oh, no, it's only one thing, one answer to this one in the BCA. No. It's a BCA thing. So, yeah, okay, so that's, yeah, where you know, if you've done it once, you'll know exactly what it is. So it's in here, type C, section C, I'm pretty sure is where you find it, from memory. And if we go down there, there we are. So this is the type of construction required. It's A, B or C. So, yes, yeah, absolutely. When it's a tall building like this, you don't really need to think too much about it because it's nearly always going to be A. Yeah. Nearly always, yeah. Yeah, especially at this height, in fact, it would pretty much always be A. So, yeah. Yes, I'm recording it. Yeah, so that's the most fire-resisting type of construction. And so we'll put that in. So type A. Okay, so then, this is where it gets interesting. FRL required. And the reason it's kind of interesting, but worth spending a bit of time on, is that it's not the easiest thing to find in the BCA, especially this one, the way it's structured. And notice I'm just still looking at NCC 2016, even though technically 2019 is now in force. So it's here, I've got a copy of NCC 2019 you can have a look at, but we'll start using that later on. So for now, I think you can stick with 2016 and just start to look at 2019. And it is mostly the fire things that have changed in the new one. So that's partly the reason I don't want to look at it, because we'd have to do things a little bit differently. So it's in specifications, you'll then find the fire-resisting construction requirements. And it's not categorised quite as well as the other parts are. So most of the other sections you'll find, once you're familiar with them, you can navigate through the section on the left here through the bookmarks, and it's essentially like a table of contents. But when you get to the specifications, it's not organised quite as well. And I found it's easier just to scroll through. Once you get to that section specifications, then you can scroll through to find the tables that have the requirements for the FRLs. And here we are. So there's the first table, which is for type A construction, and that gives you the FRLs for what you need. Well, yeah, you need to find which of these things are relevant, and then you can just copy those across. So, well, yeah, you'll have, I suppose, yeah, the things you're changing. Yeah.
Isn't everything pretty much 3 metres or more because the tower is not like...
That's external walls, but then internal walls. Yeah, they're just external walls. So, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but then you will have some that are bounding your fire compartments. Yeah. So sole occupancy units. So you'll have a tenancy. That's the unit, but then that can be broken up into different compartments technically as well.
So are all of ours non-load bearing?
Not necessarily, no.
We've got columns all through
Yeah, yeah, well, but you're not changing anything to do with the existing structure. So, but you might be proposing new structural elements that would be load bearing. Yeah, or even walls that go up across 2 stories, possibly. If it's not though, if it's just an internal partition, then it's not load bearing, and you could say that. So non-load bearing, you can see it basically has that first one, which is structural integrity. I've always got to go and look this up, but it's. So you've got the voids. I don't think so. Yeah, but essentially, I think you could say that it's basically going to be non-load bearing if it's an internal partition that you're putting inside that existing structure. So yeah, so what is it? Integrity, insulation, and structural. I've got to always look these up. I don't memorise them for some stupid reason, but you don't really need to remember them because you just look this up in the specifications for the type of wall, which we'll get to in a second. John might know these off the top of his head. What the three numbers? It's structure, insulation, and integrity, or something, isn't it?
It's actually written as R1 applies to building in blue, structural, adequacy, integrity.
That's it, yeah. And insulation's the last one, yeah. That's it. So so structural, integrity, insulation. Yeah. Well, you want to have an idea, but you'll see when you look up the specifications. Yeah, their time, yeah. So yeah, FOL in minutes. And so then the way you'll test to see that your walls have the right requirements is you look up a manufacturer's catalogue, essentially, and that will give you the fire rating for the sorts of walls that you're proposing. So here, the GIFOT catalogue has different wall types. So if we go for the fire rated wall systems, and it will give you the FOLs. Have a look at these. So I'm just trying to find one that gives you an FOL.
And John, would you like diagrams? Yes, you want a diagram of it? Of the types of wall and all that, on the fire rated wall? Nah, please say no. What? He said no. No, please no. Right, so far internal non-bearing wall is 1 to 0, 1 to 0, 1 to 0.
Sorry?
$120.
Yeah, that's if it's that's if it's on the so you've got to check the location of it as well. So it's between or bounding sole occupancy units. If it's not, if it's purely internal, it'll have different requirements. So you've got essentially if they're purely internal, they're not required to be fire rated.
Right, so then it's dash 121, right?
Yeah, it'll often just be dash, dash, dash. So if it's purely internal, inside the unit, then it doesn't need to have a fire rating.
So why has it got... Oh, right. Because
So non-load bearing and even here, so between or bounding units, if it's... okay. Oh, so that's in a fire resisting shaft.
oh, it's in a shaft.
Yeah, yeah.
So I can't read it up here, so
So, so essentially, for your class of building, technically, it doesn't need a fire rating. Normally, I think it'd be safe, even if it's not required, you would make it fire rated if it's bounding the unit. That would just be common sense. I think even though it says here dash, 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 I think that'd be common practice. And definitely if it's around any sort of fire stair or something like that, it's absolutely required. So,
you're suggesting 120, 120, 120 instead of that?
well, at least 120, yeah.
But the core is around the fire stairs, so we don't need to touch it.
Yeah, we're not doing anything to the fire stairs.
Yeah. So,
Situations that we may have a fire wall. One is that then we'll go through the fire resistance later on.
Yeah.
And with
Yes, yeah, yeah,
Maybe to create a fire corridor,
yeah,
and then maybe fire escape.
absolutely,
Well,
yeah.
we haven't touched any of that, it's
Yeah.
pre-existing.
Yeah,
But with the compliant fire egress systems, then we may have a fire exit corridor and fire wall.
yeah,
And in other situations, we may have one with the punch door where you occupy on the carpet door.
Yeah.
And then partition between the
Right, we do have that.
and that wall will be powered.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
We definitely
Sure.
have that.
So yeah, so just for the recording, John was just saying for the travel distances to the fire exit, you may need to have a fire resisting corridor, and also when you have walls extending across different stories as well. And we'll get to the travel distances in a moment as well. That's of course in the BCA. So I don't think I'll go through the Gyprock catalogue anymore, but you will definitely find the fire rating FRLs for fire rated walls in this catalogue. I just can't see them at the moment, but they are definitely in here. But this is a fairly common sort of wall that will give you a certain fire rating, but I'll have to look up where you see the FRLs. I'm surprised I don't give them to you here. So C3.15, that's what we're looking at, I'm pretty sure. I'm just going to go back a bit. Oh, 3.1, that's right, and then 3.15 is the table we're looking at. Anyhow, this tells you the requirement. The Gyprock catalogue, I thought did list, I'm sure it does list the actual FRL values of these sorts of walls somewhere. I just can't see it right now. But again, that's a fairly standard sort of wall. So you have fire check is the type of plasterboard that Gyprock make that give you a fire rating. And sometimes you might need a couple of sheets. Don't know why it's not listing the actual FRL values, but anyhow, you can essentially just say that it would have fire check each side normally.
I think it has a table where they used all the.
Yeah. So anyhow, go through the catalogues. Oh, here we are. There it is. So it's telling you here when you put a copper penetration, it has that rating, and you'll find, yeah, I'm sure that you're right that there's a table, maybe at the beginning somewhere. Yeah, you've got to go through the whole thing and you'll see it's in there. Okay, so then going back to, yes, FR required, so I'll say BCA specification 3.15, C 3.15, 3.15, and manufacturer's specification. So Bowl have their own specification for their plasterboard and other wall types. Brick walls, you can also look up the fire rating for that if you're going to do any different materials and not just plasterboard. And glass is quite hard to fire rate. So if you've got glazed partitions, it's quite hard to have them with a fire rating. But you can. And then also the other thing to realise is that because technically you don't need to have a fire rating, I know I've actually done offices where we had frosted glass partition between tenancies that worked pretty well. But we had to really make sure that the fire rating wasn't required. And I even saw one in, what was it? Oh, Suits. That's right, because I really like the offices in that show. And they did the same thing. So I thought, yep, I was on the right track there. So, here, okay, so number of exits. This is where it gets a bit more interesting. Okay, so number of exits. That's all section D. So this has been section C. And section C is quite technical. If you're not a fire engineer, it can be a difficult thing to read through. It is, yeah. But it's still not as bad as section B. Section B is for structural engineers. You still need to have a little bit of familiarity with it, but yeah, you wouldn't be looking at that all the time. But definitely section C, you do need to at least be able to look up the fire rating or the FRLs. But section D is one that you really need to be familiar with. So for interior design, section D and then probably section F are the two most important sections. So with section D, then you basically need to go through the whole thing from beginning to end. But it's much easier to understand, and it's logical. Yeah, so you start there, number of exits, and so you can just base that on the. Yep, that's it. Yep, 1.2, and then the building classification tells you which clause to look at. So we're 2 to 8, and so it's fairly simple. In addition to any horizontal exits, so horizontal exits are basically to the street or outdoor space. Otherwise, it's 2 exits. So 2 exits from each story, and particularly if it's more than 25 metres, which of course it is, and don't worry about the other thing, that's for class 2 or 3. Yeah. Yeah, and that's so that's for the towning. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, we don't need it, but I've got this money. He did so much.
Yeah.
Access to yes.
Yeah. So yeah, because with the townie you've got that street level exit at the back of the basement. Technically, it's not even really a basement, even though for some things it would be, because there's a thing about how much of the building's under the ground for the calculation of the number of stories, but that's a different thing. Yeah, because you've got that. That's counted as a different type of exit to these vertical exits, which are the ones that you need to have where you've got 5 stairs. So
And is the effective height calculated from the bottom of the first
there's a thing
line?
about that. Yeah, so you look up that. There's a way of calculating the height, and it's all to do with what's below ground, how much of the building's below ground, and whether you count the story or not.
Yeah, that's what I was just
Yeah. So, and where you measure the height from. So you can look up that clause, but for the Barangaroo, you're well over 25 metres.
Oh, yeah. Makes sense.
Whereas Town Hall, you're well under. So,
That's what I thought,
yeah. So, basements, again, we don't need to worry about because we're up above.
Appropriate bits from D1.2.
Yeah, so not less than 2, but because of the distances, you probably need more than 2, or possibly. So, in fact, I should have this open now. Barangaroo is where you start to use your floor plans and measure. And if you see in the new version of Revit, they've actually got a tool that will calculate your egress path for you. Yeah, in 2020. Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, so it's not in 2019 yet, but it's on the analysis tab if you want to have a look at 2020. It's all there. And it's pretty cool. So you just basically draw in your walls, and you can even have it so that they can go around your furniture or ignore your furniture when they're running, through the building. Yes, it's great.
We won't affect us much. They
No.
We haven't touched anything near where we.
Pretty much, yeah. So,
No one can change the corridor because we can't change that bit.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, yeah. So, okay, so if you start to measure some of the distances, right, so just using the measure tool, and I'm just going to measure from here to, so the 5 stairs, are they in this area? I don't even know, really.
No, the 5 stairs, I think, behind the
Are they up here, are they?
Where's the 5 stairs? Anyone remember?
No, I don't know. They never marked them in.
They never marked them in. They must be in that central bit.
left-hand side of the dunnies and on the right-hand side
Yeah,
of that
left.
section there.
Yeah.
Left, yep, there's where.
There?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's,
And then the other side.
No, it's the shorter one.
okay, so I'm going to draw a staring.
They didn't have stairs in it, so we couldn't tell.
Yep, sure, so,
Map. I know, it's on the door of the explorer.
okay, that'll do. God, people have been doing funny things with this building. All right, so 1,000 and that'll do. Oh,
Oh, they're going to this one section there.
so, oh yeah, it's just so I know where they are.
He's just calculating the distance from there to the furthest point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I've got a stair there, and then where was the other one?
Left next to the toilet, underneath that number 1.
Yeah. Okay. So up here.
There.
Okay. Great. Okay, so then we can do some rough measurements just to get an idea of the travel distances. Okay, so with the measure tool, with the chain option turned on, you can just say, right, so this might be one of the furthest points from the fire stair. So from there, I mean, technically we should be going around the furniture, so I'll just try and measure a path that goes... Yeah, it should be, yeah. 'Cause, yeah, yeah. So, especially when you've got workstations, they're actually fixed in location anyway. So, oh yeah, pretty much, yeah, the workstations, they're part of, you've got to set them out. Yeah, yeah. So that's, at the moment, that's, let's see if I finish it. Yeah, it was, yeah, a bit under 60, yep, yep. So, okay, so coming back to here, so number of exits, at least 2, but we may need more depending on the travel distances. So, you also should look at, yeah, so minimum 2, but we'll come back to that. And then, okay, so when fire isolated stairs required, so that's D1.3, and essentially if it's this sort of building, class 5, it's always. Okay, so these exceptions are all for class 9, you'll see. And so these days, in the past, I think it didn't have to be like this, but now pretty much every stair needs to be fire isolated. So that means it's got to be in a fire resisting shaft. And as John was saying, you may need a fire resisting corridor that forms part of that required exit.
What's the wording for that? Fire shaft?
For fire resisting shaft.
Fire resistant shaft.
Yeah. So then you move on, so we know they've all got to be fire resisting, and then we move on to the travel distances. Remember, these are required exits. Your access stairs are additional. So if you've got internal access stairs, they're additional to the required exits. That makes sense? Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so they're not required exits. No. So they're internal access stairs, and there's a little thing that can catch you out with those as well, which is kind of related to this. They can only go a certain number of stories. Yeah, you can only go, I think it's about 3 or 4 stories. You can go that high with internal access stairs before you need to offset them and have them going from another point. Yeah, it's because of fire travelling within a compartment. Yeah. Yeah. So fire stairs, they can go all the way through because they're in a shaft, but internal access stairs can't because they don't have a shaft that's fire resisting.
Yeah, it's so that if it starts burning, you wouldn't be able to use all the stairs.
Yeah, and also the fire can't travel through. So if you've got an internal access stair that goes 8 stories, then the fire can go all the way through your fire compartment, which you don't want, or through multiple fire. Yeah. 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 And something to watch out for. It affects atriums and lots of things. Yeah, yeah, and I think it's 3 stories. You have to look it up, but it's 3 or 4 stories. So, and it's kind of good when you get to this part of the BCA because it is in order. And so then the next one, this is probably where you spend the most time looking at your planning to make sure this control still works. And it's one that's probably a little bit confusing at first. So you need that's 2 and 3. We're not doing that. We're doing 5 to 9. So this is the control that applies. It's no point on the floor must be more than 20 metres from an exit, or a point where travel in 2 directions, in different directions, to 2 exits is available. In which case the maximum distance to one of those exits must not exceed 40 metres. So if it's only got 1 exit, which doesn't apply to us anyway, you can increase that distance to 30 metres, but that's also on the level of the access, so that doesn't apply. So to open space. And open space, there is a definition for that you've got to be careful of, but again, that doesn't really apply if you're only looking at this upper story. So it's really that first one.
So it's only I.
Yeah, So again, 20 metres to an exit or 40 metres to a point where travel in different directions to two exits available. And so I'd be struggling to see how this one does comply unless the door's here. Let's see. So they probably have ignored the furniture, which is an option, but it's not best practice. So measuring directly there, yeah, they're fine. So they could get around the furniture, and so that's 30 metres to there.
Too bad if you put a whole lot of mini rooms in.
That's right, yeah, so that's it, exactly. So then another thing you can do is draw lines. So if you draw detail lines, then you can start to work out your path.
So you're saying you can measure your line.
Yeah, yeah. So there, that's probably okay as a path. I could maybe just adjust it slightly. And this does, and this is something you use a lot when you're doing your planning. You'll often have to, you know, adjust things and
Once again, it doesn't matter if it doesn't apply, you just have to comply, you just have to say it doesn't apply.
well, you should be making it comply,
No,
but
but we've
yeah,
already designed it. So
Yes,
if
yeah.
it didn't comply from this report, we just say it doesn't apply.
I suppose so. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, yep, yeah. And so the nice thing about these detail lines is that they give you the length as a in the properties. So you can see there, this one's 18 metres, and then the next one is 7 metres, and then the next one is, let's say, 8 metres.
Can't select them all and get them added together.
I don't think so. No, you can use, you can schedule that and do it that way. But again, have a look at 2020. It does. It's got an automatic tool for this.
I can't add 20.
Yeah, that's what I'll be doing. Yeah, put it into Excel. So you just need to look at that, and then you can tell. I mean, they've planned this building so that it complies, so you should be okay. But you just got to know how to get that calculation. So fire egress. So again, the most important thing is that you put in the requirement, and you could probably just copy that clause from the BCA. Right, because that applies exactly. And, oops, didn't I just copy text? Let's just do that again. Okay, it's just getting some weird characters. That's better. Oh, it's getting confused. That's me. Copy. Okay, doesn't want to copy from the BCA. I don't want to sit down and type that up. That's really frustrating. What's in here? That clause could just be copied across if I can get it.
Clause CI.
Oh, here we go. It doesn't now wants to do it. There we go. That's wicked.
And
Acrobat.
that's fire egress, yeah?
Yeah. That's the first part. So we've got to check those and see what other things apply. So yeah, so that's definitely the most important thing, exit travel distances. And so that clause is probably the most important. But then you've got to go through and check the other things and make sure they comply. So the distance between exits matters, because here that's the control we're using. We have more than one exit, and we're looking at that 40 metre requirement. So then, again, for you, it's not class 2 or 3, it's not class 9, so it's this one.
60 metres apart.
Yeah. So you could even, again, there's nothing wrong sometimes with just copying the wording from here and making it make sense. You don't want to just copy whole blocks of text and not make it meaningful. So here we go. So that's going to make sense if we just say exits are required, must be not more than . So not more than 60 metres apart. There is also a requirement for when they're too close together, but I think that's... oh, yes, here we go. That's it. Yeah, so that's just below that. So we'll get back to that. And it's all pretty logical stuff, really. So you don't want them too far apart, of course, but also you don't want them too close together. That kind of defeats the purpose of having different exits. So you put an and. And then an extra end. There we go. Okay, so again, just say exactly what the requirements are. So again, got to keep going through that whole section pretty much. So, and you'll learn things about how to design buildings like this by reading this section. And I'm amazed by people I've worked with, even some pretty senior architects, who have obviously never read through this whole section and don't understand basic things like how external stairways need to work. But all the good architects I've worked with have definitely read through this multiple times and are across it all. And don't do what the bad ones did, who tried to get some external stairs built that wouldn't comply. Or actually the worst one, she put a huge window, a 10-storey window in a fire stair. And it tells you pretty clearly here that's not allowed. But it took the builders to checking it all, doing the pricing, to tell everyone that that was not okay. Anyway, so you can do fire-rated glass blocks. Yeah, fire-rated glass is a bit trickier, especially, and also there are requirements for openings in a fire stair.
Oh, yeah, not opening windows.
Yeah, well, even fixed windows. Yeah, there are requirements for openings, how far they can be from other openings and things like that. Yeah, so it is possible to do them, but definitely that 10-metre high, 10-storey high it was, window wouldn't have been allowed.
My teachers allowed other farms
Yeah.
for the town.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, you can do openings, but yeah, you just got to make them comply. There's requirements in
It's
there.
not open, but it's
Yeah. Oh yeah, they have to be fixed. Yeah. And so fire-rated windows are always a bit trickier than people think, but you can do them. Yeah. And the easy way is fire-rated glass blocks. Yeah, that's the easiest. Well, yeah, but they're getting better ones. They're getting better all the time. Yeah. So yeah, different options. So yeah, but again, it's just a matter of looking in section D, and it tells you. So then dimensions of exits, and you need to know this. Yep.
There's lots of exits.
Yep. Yeah, it's a big thing. I mean, that's what keeps people alive when there's a big fire. Except if
I'm glad of it in real life. Just for the
Yeah.
report, I wouldn't mind you.
Yeah, and then, but also it gets you thinking about the things that aren't made clear in here, like we'll say accessible egress, because we can't say disabled anymore, even though they do still say disabled. Yeah, accessible. So people in wheelchairs generally, and I know plenty of guys in wheelchairs, and they're quite happy to say it's disabled. So we'll keep saying that for the time being, because you'll see that the requirements in here aren't all that clear, but you should allow room for them to be safe in the fire-resisting shaft as well.
Yes.
And that's...
John's been through that. We just
Oh,
have
good.
to park them in the...
Yeah.
There's to be space to park them
Yeah,
in the shaft.
that's it. Yeah, exactly. So this probably wouldn't be big enough, but you could check that. So again, you just need to say in the report what the requirements are. So the other thing, though, is the width. Generally, it's a metre. And it's a metre, except for the doorways, of course. The doorways have their own requirement. But otherwise, it's a metre. And it doesn't say it here, but I know it's a metre between handrails throughout the whole path of the exit. And so that's really important. And
So both A and B are approvable?
oh yeah, so the height as well. So I should say that height 2 metres. That's the same as in any stair.
Yep.
And then the doors, it can be a bit less, but 20 mil. And so again, though, that 2 metres. That's standard for all stairs. And then, but yeah, good one to remember. And then a metre between handrails, which is very different to most other stairs. And then also, though, this is where you start to look at the occupancy. And So that's in another section, which we'll get to in a minute. But so technically, you should be working out the total number of people on that story.
We've got that from our metrics.
Yep, great. So, and you know, so there is a way of working out areas in Revit. I'll just point them out to you because you want to know this later. The area tool is brilliant. So you have here this area option, and you've got area plans, which are one of my favourite things to show people, even though at first most people don't realise why I bang on about it so much, because a lot of people instead use rooms to give them areas, because rooms will give you areas. The reason I don't like using rooms is because they automatically calculate rooms. You can put your own dividers and things like that in, but it's a lot of extra work. So you can get a room here, and then you can put the option into the tag to show the area, which is there. And you think, great, it's telling me the area. Why don't I just use that for everything? Well, the problem is, it's calculating where the edge of the room is, based on these rules that you've got to set up. And when you're looking at things like the accommodation of a level, and also even just calculating things like floor space and then lettable area, you want to set the boundaries of those spaces yourself. So you want to be able to draw where the area's edges are without letting Revit decide.
Can you show us how that works?
So yeah, sure. So with the area tool, it's my favourite thing for my own designs, because you'll always have to give floor space ratios and other areas as well whenever you submit an application. So areas are really important, and then for this as well, fire egress. So when you go to click on the area option, you have to make an area plan. Then you choose the level, so I'm on level 35, so I'll choose that level. And you get the option to automatically create boundary lines. It's hit and miss. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So I'll say yes, and we'll see what it does. If it doesn't, you can say no, and then just draw the boundaries yourself. But here, it's done a pretty good job. So you can see there, it's traced around the whole outside. We at least had curtain walls, so that's... Oh, no, well, no, the outer edge is all it will do for you, and then the rest you've got to do yourself. So then, though, you've got this area boundary option. But firstly, I want to show you, it's made a new kind of view. Now, I left it on rentable, and that's okay. But there's the other option is gross building. So that's great, because it means it doesn't mess up the original floor plan. It doesn't affect it at all. So if we go down here, though, and look at area plans, it then has all the options there to show areas and to then even have some nice graphics and things. So,
Can you take things out within that aren't?
oh yeah, you can hide them. Yeah, you don't want to delete them because that deletes it from the other one. But you can definitely hide
so
and.
that you can exclude certain things from
Oh
the
yes, of
area?
course. Yeah, sure. So maybe we don't want to see furniture. So I'll just hide those.
Oh no, I don't mean that. I mean exclude it from the.
Oh yes, of course. Oh yeah, I'm going to show you that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I'll hide the furniture just so it doesn't get in the way, and then this as well. The lighting, we definitely don't need that. So that's a bit cleaner. Even the grids maybe are going to get in the way. Yeah, much cleaner. Okay, so then to draw in boundaries, you can just use that area boundary tool under area. So notice how until you make an area plan, it doesn't give you the option to make an area. I'll make an area in a second, but you can only make these things on an area plan. So the other thing is area boundaries, and so maybe I'll just go around, and notice it's got this option, apply area rules. Often I'll just turn that off, so then I can just draw where I want. Otherwise it'll try and make the line go inside the wall following these rules that are set up. But if I turn that off, I can just draw anywhere. So I'll draw over this core. We're going to say we'll exclude that from our accommodation calculations. And here as well. Exactly. And even the bathrooms can be excluded. So, yeah, so that's... sorry? Yeah, lifts too. Yeah, that's right. So I'm just going to draw some lines. And it's nicer than lots of the other things in Revit where you've got to join the lines perfectly to make closed shapes, here you can see they're not quite touching, but it'll let that, it'll still work. So it's a really nice tool in Revit, and one that's probably underused. But when people who use it for a living use it all the time, because you have to do floor space calculations and site area calculations and all these other things for every project, and that's why they've got the tool there. And yeah, the people who use rooms, you know they're students. So then, so I've got enough there to then start doing some areas. And so under the area option, you can choose area. I'm just going to click and notice how it's going with that cross there and showing you where it's stopping. So where I've drawn the boundaries, that's where it stops. So I'll just place it down there. And that gives me basically the whole level that I want. I'll show you in a second how you can divide this up into different areas. But then to see this a bit better, I'm going to put on a colour scheme. So on the Annotate tab, you've got Colour Field Legend. And let's put this to the side. And I'll just leave the defaults, and it's going to then fill that in, and it makes it much clearer then where the area is that I'm using. And we can break that up further. So if we want to have these, say, just an example, these, whatever they are, meeting rooms, yep, broken up. So we'll draw an area boundary around those. And again, they don't need to be perfectly closed or any of that stuff you've got to do with the 3D things. So now they're excluded. And I can even break them up into different spaces just by drawing a boundary between them. Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm going to do. So, yeah. So, in fact, I won't divide them. I'm going to leave them as one big space since they're next to each other. That's yeah. Yeah. This is great for interiors. This whole area tool with colour schemes, and so I'll go back and put a new area in just for the meeting rooms. So at the moment they're the same type. They're both called area. So then I'll go back to my. Well, I'll start just by changing one of the names. So I'm going to select one of these areas, and we'll call that meeting rooms. Spell. And then we'll call the other one just office. Oops. Okay, so at the moment they're the same colour. So then we can select the legend and go to Edit Scheme. Change that colour option to name. I'm just going to say OK. Sorry. And then I'm leaving it on the automatic colours. So it uses the Pantone colours. You can change them. And so you've got the full Pantone library in there for some nice colours. But, yeah. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, Pantone is a great colour system. And there we are. So, two different colours, and they correspond to what's in the legend. And so then if I do a new one, let's say we want to do the the bathrooms, then that could be another area. It's already defined, so I can just place that in there. So we might call that amenities or core or something like that. And then it gets its own colour, and that just comes up on the legend automatically. Yeah.
Now, is John still wanting to do something at 4:30?
Oh, right, okay, yes, so I'll finish up in a sec. Yep. So, yeah, so that should give you enough to work out the amount of accommodation. So, and you need to look at that to see if you need to have wider exits. So maybe we'll finish up there. You can read through, I mean, I highly recommend just reading through the rest of section D, especially D1. Then D2 tells you about construction of exits, which you probably should just have a bit of a look at, but it's not probably as important, even though you will need to look at that later for things like your stairs and requirements for stairs generally are in section D2. And So here, goings and rises, all those basic requirements are in there. We've been looking for those. And then, so here we go, so access people with disability. See, they still do say disability. And then, well, that's not going to be required here, so you've got a lift and that's all you need there. So then, can just quickly have a look at section F, because you need to, even if you aren't doing the detailed requirements from section F, which is where you get the number of bathrooms required and things like that, and lots of other things as well, light and ventilation, really important there, room heights, but calculation of numbers of people occupying your spaces, I think it's actually back in section D, but there's a link to it here. And I've always got to start here, because that's just the way I do it. So here you can see it tells you here in section F 2.2 that you need to calculate the number of occupants. And then it's got a link that takes you back to section D, where it has a table, I'm fairly sure, that tells you that. Here it is, yeah. Okay, so offices, 10 metres per person is what that means. So that makes sense. So if you've got, in this case, 2,338 square metres of floor space, office space, you divide that by 10 and round up to get the number of people occupying that space. Right, so 234 people. That's it. So that then tells you, when you go back to section D, you should also have a look at section F, but I don't think you need to do that for your report. So going back to section D, where was it? So construction of exits. So we're just there. The width of the exits, which, here we go, width of required stairs. Oh no, that's not it. Oh God, I just had it.
Is that the dimensions?
Yeah, so it's D1.6, is it? That's
that was the first bit, AB.
oh yeah, dimensions of exits. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, spot on. Yeah, that's it. Here we are. So here we are. So if it accommodates more than 100 people, then it needs to be wider.
Stairs have to be right.
Yeah. Yeah. But
But we're 238, so we're not. Oh,
well, no, more than
Oh, we've got 1.5 levels. Though.
more than 200. So what you would say here, though, is that a lot of this is not usable space. So I've included the corridors, so you come back and you'd have a look at whether those boundaries make sense, and you would probably take out a lot of this space. It's not really usable office space. So you would definitely have a boundary there. And then this, maybe if it's a conference room, that wouldn't be either.
So
Right.
the way we would write that was that we give the 2,338 metres square, but then we'd say it is compliant once we minus the
Yeah.
non-usable space.
That's right. You'd need to show that the usable office space is going to give you less than 200 people, essentially. So here again, I'll just block off that corridor, and that should take it under. So what are we up to now? And this is where so there we are. So that's 183, 184 people. So that complies. And again, they've designed this building already to comply, so really you're just trying to show how they've made it comply.
Right. But we don't have to put in this diagrammatical evidence, you can just say.
I think you should try and say how much office space there is.
But we can say it without
Yeah,
showing in plan.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, just in words, yeah. So, yeah, so that should be enough, and that's probably a good place to stop, but
Is that everything on that BCA list?
yeah, it is, yeah. So that's the thing, yeah, John didn't ask for the, for section F, which normally is what we do for a lot of the other projects, but yeah, he's been nice and made it a bit less work. So that's
What's the last thing?
health and amenity.
What's the last thing in your list? It says
Oh, that's just determining how the proposal aligns with the intended use, which is kind of what we've been doing as we go through anyway. Yeah, 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 yeah. So that's something we'll have to work out. But
so there you would put it with the summary. If it wasn't compliant, you particularly highlight that for.
yeah, and essentially you'd be saying this building was designed to be an office, and so your design aligns with the yeah, exactly, yeah, intended, yeah, that's right. So that's it, and but again, just be aware, for interior design, section F is really important as well, and you should get familiar with that. And that's the way I started to learn to use it, was by focusing on those sections and just reading them cover to cover, all those chapters.
Isn't that how you do everything then?
Yeah.
Most things, but yeah.
Here's the details, man.
Yeah, sort of. But then, you know, I've tried reading section C and section B especially a few times, and I still don't understand it.
I thought you were going to say that. I fall asleep every time.
Yep, that's right. So that should do it, I think. But yeah, hopefully that'll make the process a bit clearer. No worries.
Thank you.